So over the past few weeks, we have heard from different guests and speakers who work and minister within different groups and different populations to talk to us and help us learn how we can love a little better different groups and different populations. So we have a very, very special guest speaker tonight. We have with us Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Liz Harris-Lamkin. When she retired in 2017, she was the senior chaplain for the Georgia Air National Guard after 22 years of military chaplaincy service, yes. And in 2021, she retired from the Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta as the chaplain there after 23 years. But earlier in life, even more important than that, she's a local girl. She went to Irwin High School because she grew up in the, that's right, Irwin, yes. Grew up in the Emma area of Asheville, right down the street from Mr. Joe Spivey. Then went off to Mars Hill College, yes, college at the time. And still has many good relatives in Buncombe and Madison counties, including distant cousin Neil Hall, who blesses us on Sunday mornings. So we're very glad to hear from her tonight about how we can learn to love better those in military service. And as I have been doing for every guest speaker, I read about 4 short Bible verses to be tumbling around in our minds and help guide our thinking as we hear from our speaker. So right quick, first let me read 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. For just as the sufferings of Christ flow over into our lives, so also through Christ our comfort overflows. And then from Psalm chapter 27, verses 1 through 3. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, when my enemies and my foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident. Then in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 11 through 13. So put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers, principalities of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. And then finally, John chapter 15, verses 12 through 13. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. So, Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Liz Harris-Lamkin.
You gotta help me. You all think you're gonna outsmart me here, well, I'm coming back there to you.
Make yourself
No,
known.
we're back, on the back, so I'm just gonna come back there with you, right?
Go for it.
You can stand wherever you like.
You
Well,
thought you were gonna get out the back door.
We have a lot of back row Baptists here.
I know. Thank you.
No, I'm good. I'll sit right here.
That'll be fine, I'm glad. You're front row guy. Oh, this appears pretty special to me. Sorry. Well, I am very glad to be here. And thank you. I thought Stuart was going to say, and earlier than that, he became my stepson. We didn't even say that.
That was the high point of your life.
Oh, yeah. He said this and this and this, and then earlier, I became his stepmother. But anyway, so there on that, huh? Golly, so many of you I've seen before, and it is a pleasure to be able to tell you a little bit of my journey and story. Thank you for loving our family, loving my husband, loving Stuart, and loving me tonight. I thank you and for all of the family. As Stuart mentioned to you, I spent about 23 years as a military chaplain in the Air National Guard, and as you know, it's one of the reserve components. When I came in, I thought to myself, when the woman who I went to speak to down at the Pentagon about military chaplains said the Air National Guard, I had never heard of it. That's how long ago that was. Because, can I put this here? I don't want to have to do this. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. And I thought it was just the Army guys that threw sandbags. And I didn't know there was an Air Force component to it that had chaplains, there are Air Force chaplains. And so, I wasn't even smart enough to think long about it. I knew immediately that was what I was called to do. I just had to wait for the interview, and if they offered me a job, I was going to take it. But I knew that that's what I was supposed to do. The interesting thing about it, I had joked about it, but I think it's likely true. I've never done the statistics on it, but I may very well have been the oldest lieutenant or butterbar, as we would say in the Air Force, commissioned as, I don't know, as a chaplain or anybody. I was 37 years old. Now that's old, going in the military. I mean, I was grandma. Most people are getting out of the military about that age. If not, they're already maybe a colonel or a general or whatever and ready to be done. But anyway, that's kind of funny because I'd be saluting these little majors that were half my age, and they were like, "Ma'am, are you sure?" Because they thought I was so old I must have been a general. No. It just looks different to you. But in some ways, age was a gift. It gave me the opportunity to bring some wisdom and a lot of experiences. I was a healthcare chaplain and able to bring that work. I was a better military chaplain for being a healthcare chaplain, and vice versa. It helped me understand pain and distress in different ways, and yet the same way, because human distress, in whatever uniform we put it in, or whatever language it's expressed in, it comes from the same place of woundedness in all of us. And the same place of hope, in the same place where our Christian faith specifically has a lot of its story told. Where brokenness happens, there is opportunity for transformation. And now another word for transformation is resurrection. Now we're not quite there yet. We don't want to hurry. But transformation and that work toward that takes time. And chaplains are usually invited to the places where pain and wounded places have occurred. Whether it's physical, whether it's relational, whether it's spiritual, whether it's moral, which is a huge issue now. Huge. I'll just say this. Drone pilots, if they're not deployed, they're usually out west somewhere. They may be active duty or guardsmen. They're flying a mission. They're doing their drop, doing their kill. Then they do their damage assessment. And then they go home to their kids' soccer game. Can you imagine that? Because you can fly a drone from anywhere. the wound of that kind of disconnect in your life than to go to the ball game for your kid. We see moral distress more and more. How many of you, and I already know one, how many of you were either in the military or someone in your immediate family is in the military? All right, great. I know your wife is on her AT right now, great. And so for the rest of you, thank you. Thank you. In your immediate family, how many, show me again? In one? Oh my gosh, lots of people. So you're watching this news with probably some distress. I am. And how many of you know people that were in the military? A lot of people aren't anymore. Yeah, or your family or your uncle. My father was in World War II in Okinawa. I had his uniform, and I used to could wear it, but I got a little fat for it over the last few years. But you know, those spaces are really important for us. The rabbis have said that any pain can be endured if we can make a story from it. Have you ever noticed the Bible is primarily stories? Most of us don't go, you know, I love all those stories in Leviticus. Or Numbers. Where we go is to the stories. The stories because they're our stories. The stories of our journeys. The ones where we look at other people struggling with what it's like to have some kind of faith. Or no faith, or ready to get rid of your faith. All of those things where we bring life and look to them. Chaplains, military chaplains, tend to show up at those painful points. And the effect of those painful points, military chaplains often watch over years. You can see where a wound led to in a relationship or into a substance use disorder, or the next thing that happened, the affair, or the cutting, or all of the things that come from pains. Those are usually the symptoms from a wound or pain. That we have the privilege to stand near those stories. And as a service member, just like every one of us, they are asking, where does this pain fit into my story? I'll never forget a young Marine said, Chaplain, do you think I should have ever joined the Marines? I don't know all why he asked me that. But to hear him trying to refit his story, what do I do with this experience of being hurt? Did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? Where do I lace that into who I am today? And where we put it. And it's not just the story of our own lives, but where does this fit in the big story? Where does this fit in God's story? You know, we just can't usually square up our pain, can we? Oh, it got fixed. Our pain's all fixed. Doesn't happen that way, does it? How many people who've experienced major traumas in their life say, oh, it's all fixed? We don't get squared up the way you get ready to put your uniform on. You don't. But we do know that pain can be changed. It can be transformed. It can be, for a lack of a better word, healed or resurrected. As I mentioned before, we are in a life of not just transforming or transformed and resurrected pain, but every day the work of transforming and resurrecting our pain. It didn't just happen to Jesus way back then. It's our work. That is the witness of the resurrection. Show me what you do with those wounds. I want to know about them. No wonder, what was his name? That didn't appreciate it. Oh, Thomas is going, I don't like to see that. You got to prove it to me. Well, we all do that. What do I do with this? I'm not sure about it. We are just not sure. Richard Rohr, who is one of my favorite biblical scholars, theologians, and public theologians, said, pain that is not transformed will be transmitted. All we had to do was turn the news on a week ago, and here we go again. Down another path of war. Whatever you think about it, why do we keep doing it? Why do we keep doing the same stuff? Because we're not willing to transform ourselves through God's help, socially or individually. Systems keep doing the same old thing over and over. We have the opportunity to transform and be healed, but it's hard work. It's hard work. And it's painful work. But it is the work that we are called to as Christians, to say, this is not going to get the last word. I still got the wounds. They inform me, but they don't dictate who we're going to be. So I pray about this thing. We need to all be praying about this thing. It's not good. One of the spots was my last, where there's been bombing, and was my last deployment, and I thought about the folks there and the folks everywhere else, and someday we're going to get this. I'll be so glad when we beat all of these things into plowshares instead of taking our plowshares, as we say, and it was in the guard, and beat them into swords. What if we could do that? Hallelujah. Amen for that. Well, I'm going to tell you just 2 or 3 stories. And I want to give some theological meaning that I've attached to them for my spiritual life. Now, I'm older than dirt, and so I've had a little time to think on these things. But I wanted to tell you these stories. It's kind of like I can talk all day about Leviticus and you won't remember, so I'll tell you a story or 2. I think you'll like them. I hope you will. I want to tell you the story. I call it the story of the soldier at Landstuhl, whose voice I never heard. First of all, who knows about Landstuhl? Okay. Landstuhl is the biggest and only large medical trauma center in Europe left. It is the major hospital where people were in theater from battlefield, flown medically, escorted by, if you were critical, by critical care air transport teams from Bagram, Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever they were, flown from there to Landstuhl in Germany, and where they would either remain a few days for more stabilization, or they may just be back on the plane the next day with the critical care and air transport team to come back to a hospital in the United States. Or they might get better enough to go back downrange, that's what we would say. Because they just had something that wasn't too big and too whatever, they still needed to have it cared for. We even had dogs that would be transported out. Dogs get constipated, did you know that? We had a dog and come out because it's constipated. constipated. Well, you know, don't you love that story? Because we like to think it's just the big glass or whatever, but sometimes the dog's constipated. And I thought that was kind of funny. But anyway, I was deployed to Landstuhl, and it was the perfect location for me because I was a healthcare chaplain. So to go to a hospital to be specifically with young service members of every branch, under every kind of wound or injury, from the most critical blast wounds, burns, to somebody that fell playing football and broke their ankle, or somebody that fell down and broke their teeth out. I mean, all from every range. I worked in the psych unit. There were plenty of wounds right there. Right there. That was my primary day part in the hospital. But one night I was on call and I got beeped to the ICU. And oddly enough, a soldier was requesting a chaplain. You know, usually you're not in the ICU and are able to request a chaplain. But, so I showed up and I look and I glance over at this young man, and I need to be honest, I thought, that boy's gonna die tonight. Part of it is I'm not used to seeing young, fit, little hulks of people that are fit and 25 or 23 years old. I'm used to seeing older people or whatever. And there was a tube, and some kind of drainage tube everywhere there could be. And this young man was also on a ventilator. And for some reason, let me just say this, he was very swollen. He looked so bad to me at a distance. Anyway, so I stopped to the doctor to get a brief, and I asked the doctor how he was doing, and I was really surprised. He said, you know, he's doing incredibly well. That's great. That's great. I think, I don't know his name, and I think it was some kind of blast wound, you know, during Operation Enduring Freedom, during that portion time. Blast wounds were a major piece where, you know, hit IDs or whatever, would come up and blast, or other kinds of wounds like that would be very destructive to the whole system. But anyway, I went in to see this young man equipped with that information, and I went in to see him, and oddly enough, he had a clipboard. He had enough medicine on board to kill a horse, any one of us. But again, these were hulks of kids, you know, that can do a lot of things. So he had a clipboard, and clearly he had been writing on that clipboard, and he would go off to sleep. And then he'd wake back up and scribble a little bit more. Scribble a little more and whatever. So I went in and I introduced myself while he was awake. This little visit I'm gonna tell you about took about an hour, because it took that long to scribble and understand what he wanted to say. So the first thing he did, and it took a long time to say, chaplain, sleep, 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 scribble, scribble, scribble. Chaplain, am I going to die? Well, now I've learned, and I truly believe, if somebody thinks about that question and has the vulnerability and courage to ask, you better tell them the truth. Nobody wants to be lied to about that. How many of you have been around? We all know it. They never told us this was going to happen. Well, sometimes they should have told you, but sometimes we don't have the courage to ask. It's too painful. But he had the courage to ask, chaplain, am I going to die? And then he'd go back to sleep. Then he'd wake back up, and I said, I want you to know that I appreciate your telling me and asking me that. And I want you to know that I take it very seriously. And I want you to know that I talked to the doctor before I came in, and I want you to know that the doctor really told me that you're doing quite well. Now, you know you're hurt. You can see this. You're awake enough to know it. But he told me you're doing really well. And he gave no indication that he was concerned that you would die. I think it's really great. This kid didn't say, am I going to pass away? You know, we love to say pass away, don't we? Where are we going to pass to? He wanted to know if he was going to die. Yeah, he hit the nail right on the head. And so I told him the truth, and I said, and I promise you, if he had told me differently, I would have told you that. You have the courage to ask about your truth and the time to be with it. Hello. And anyway, so that seemed to appease him a bit. And then I said to him, I'm going to call him Matt. Does everybody agree? Can we call him Matt?
Yes.
Matt, my boy. Matt, I said, Matt, do you think you're going to die? You know, because when you're hurt, you don't know. You just know that just a few minutes ago, you were some other country, half the world away, and now you're in a critical care unit. And I asked him that, and he said, nope, no. I thought it was funny. He didn't feel like he was going to die, but he wanted to know if he was. See, there you are, trying to put that together. What's my experience of myself, of the world? I don't think I'm going to die, but I better find out. All that working out and wrestling like Jacob with the night divine visitor of, what's this about? What's my name? And what's yours, God? Wrestling with his reality. And so I was really proud he said no. I thought he might say yes, but I didn't know. And goes off to sleep again. And wakes back up and gets his pad out. And he right off the pad onto the side. And he said, Chaplain, I want you to know that I love God. Isn't that neat? I want you to know that I loved God. During this Lenten season, I am so grateful for that young man's confession of his faith. Remember when we stood in our own baptism waters, and the story goes, and what is your confession of faith? I didn't ask you. But we say, Jesus Christ is Lord. As we enter the deep waters of loss and resurrection. But he wanted me to know who and whose he was. And I really affirmed it. And I said, I'm so grateful you would tell me what sustained you and what's keeping you here and what gives you hope. And God is present with you right here. And then he goes back to sleep. But he still wasn't finished talking. Wakes back up. And he said, Chaplain, if I die, will you tell my parents that I love them? You know, I stood by that boy's head and shoulders, and I could, he was all swollen up and banged up, and I looked along his hairline and along his ears, and I could still see the red dirt. It was like, you know, one of those moments, it was slow motion. I could see the dirt in his ears and around his hairline. And it was the same color as his hair, and red hair and freckles. Just like Stuart did when he was younger. Red hair and freckles, and I would look at them. And I said to him, yes, Matt, I promise you that if you die, I will tell your parents about our talk and that you love them. Back waking up again. I said, now Matt, I have one request of you. If you don't die, will you promise me that you will tell your parents that you love them? And he goes, yeah. That was the conversation. He was off to sleep. I think he was at peace. I think he could go to sleep. Do you hear the vulnerability in that story? Do you hear the big thread of who am I? What's going to happen to me? Whose am I? I think God may have a hand in my life here. And because of God's presence in his life, I have some love to give, and I want to give it to my parents, and I want you to make witness to it if I can't. That is really the human story. We only wrote on paper, but that's the only story we tell. At the end of the day, when we say, did my life matter? Yeah. Well, I went back to the ICU the next morning, and I knew that, man, part of it is I'm curious if he died or not. Because people came in every single day and left every single day. And I don't know that one person died while I was there, even though they're very injured. And so when I went to the ICU, the bed was empty, and I had a little bit of anxiety. But it turns out that that young man got the next flight out that morning early with a critical care air transport team back to the United States. He was able to travel by then. The crew had rested, and he was headed home. Now, you're going to ask me this. Do you know if he died? I don't know. In some ways, this is awful. That doesn't matter to me as much as knowing how he lived. And that I didn't have to be the chaplain to call, but the chaplain to celebrate and go, he's headed home. That's what chaplains in the military have a chance to do and be about, and it's such a gift. I'll stop there. Before I tell my second story, what thoughts do you have about that story? Any thoughts, curiosities, questions? How do you like Matt? You love Matt? Yeah, I do
But
too.
you did what he needed was to give me some assurance. And that somebody knows about my situation. And you said he went home. Whether he lived or died, he went home with his faith.
Absolutely.
But what you did for him was wonderful, and that's what he needed.
Well, I think an important piece of what that confession of his faith and then the questions was, is some things aren't real unless they're heard out loud. I think we have missed something a bit in our own tradition as Baptists, the power of confession. You know, I don't know how I'd like necessarily going to a priest and, saying all the crappy things I've done in my life. But there is power in saying, I need to name this and I need to seek forgiveness for it. Or I need to seek transformation because of it. Or this happened to me and I need healing. Confession, hearing it said, that's why people in therapy tell things. They may tell it over and over and over and over and over. Because we need to. We need to be heard to confirm our truth or to challenge our paradigms that may be hurtful and not necessarily checked out in other kinds of reality. We need to do that. So it was one of those moments of, it was a long hour and yet the perfect hour. Thank you. And I'm so grateful I got to meet Matt. Any other thoughts? Questions?
normally go see someone if they request it?
No, I just happen to be on call.
Okay, but I mean, when they're admitted, do they ask them, do you want to see a chaplain?
Typically, I don't think so. They might, but I don't think so. Typically, they're going to, especially in a military culture, they are used to having a chaplain be around, visiting in their work areas. They know chaplains. A lot of people in the military really like to talk to chaplains, and some of it may not have anything to do with the spiritual life, but because of confidentiality. A chaplain holds confidentiality that is not held in a medical situation. They can't. You know, if a person's, they're fit for duty or whatever, and they're afraid I'm not fit for duty, I'm not gonna go in there and tell them that. They may pull my flying, may pull my capacity to fly or whatever. And so, and typically in a hospital, they may ask them, but a lot of times, even in my civilian life, I was assigned to critical care always. And so I would make rounds, and introduce myself. And if they didn't want a chaplain, it was fine. But I can tell you, in all of my years, probably 3 people said, I don't want to talk with you. Oddly enough, I can't believe it. I would have thought more would have get out of here. But a lot of people are referred as well.
What did that experience do for you?
What did it do for me?
Yes.
It helped me know that in many ways, I am just like him. That if I could just learn to be that honest and vulnerable before another person and before God, notice he wasn't saying, I want you to know that. He didn't say, I want you to know I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and I've been and I've had communion 15 times. He said, I love God.
Did that affirm your calling?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I knew that I was in the exact right place, that moment, that day, and it was, this is why I'm telling you that story. We all have a million stories, paperwork, all the stuff you do, meetings you go to, but there are stories that shape me, and that's one of them. This is why I even have a name for the story, because it shaped me. Yes, ma'am.
Did you, if you had wanted to, could you have followed up with and found out what happened?
I probably could have. One of the things that I've learned over time is to trust that God sends the right person at the right time, and that I did not have to be the person to figure that out. I couldn't get from Germany to somewhere in Texas and figure that out when there were 200 more people coming in that day. And so I learned that early in my experience is Liz. I remember a supervisor said to me, Liz, why are you having a hard time trusting God? Because I thought it was going to be about me. I thought it was about me. I got to get all this done and do all of that. See, that's cute. Trust God. Now, had I heard differently, or I probably would have, but I didn't have to worry anymore about him. Let him go. Let him fly. Let him fly away. Thank you for asking that question. I want to tell you one other really quick story, because it's one of my favorite stories. Back in 2007, I was deployed to Guam, and Guam is a daggum long way. Anybody ever been to Guam?
Renee went to Guam.
Oh, it was the year I missed Easter. I flew right over Easter. I left on like a Saturday, and I get there like on a Monday, and I was like, it's a long way. And my chaplain assistant also flew to Guam. He was from the Puerto Rica Air National Guard. I want to say this, people talk about chaplains. Nothing happens alone. Chaplains work in teams. And my chaplain assistant, or religious support person, was the most significant person. We didn't do anything by ourselves. You go together. I think Jesus had a good idea, go in twos. I don't really know all the reasons why, but I just know sometimes we need somebody else to make a witness for us or to support us when we can't. Also, chaplains are non-combatant, so it was nice to have, somebody to support you in the event you should need that. But primarily, they are religious support specialists. Lots of training, lots of background in counseling support. They carry confidentiality as well. So a lot of people don't know that, and they don't get the recognition that should always happen. Anyway, I was meeting my religious support person in Guam at Anderson Air Force Base to support and supplement the chaplain corps that was already there. Because that's a regular base, it's in the garrison base, and there were already a bunch of chaplains there. But during the war, there was a huge influx of young airmen accompanying B-52s, those big old things that looked like about 10 buses. And they had flown from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, which is where my husband's from, just right up the road from Barksdale. They had flown from there, and all those B-52s were on the ramp at Anderson Air Force Base to be ready for any needed deployment into the theater. You don't wait and fly. You can fly those aircraft a long way, but typically you're going to forward place them, in the Indian Ocean somewhere, or somewhere where you can get in there without so much fuel, so much time, whatever you need. But anyway, our job was to support them and all of the crews, maintainers for a 24-hour shift and munitions loaders. So that was a bunch of air. So our job was to take care of that extra influx of people. It was a wonderful opportunity. We worked our behindy off taking care of those folks. And one of the biggest things we did is, on top of visiting them, we enlisted a lot of those folks to help us refurbish the Airmen's Center, the Airmen's Ministry Center, because it had been sort of, I bet if I walk back into some Sunday school rooms that are not being used, what's in there?
Everything.
Yeah, everything.
Everything.
Everything. All maps of Canaan. Here's where the kings were, all the extra sets of chairs, flower pots, So this had happened at the Airmen's Ministry Center because it was not being used. And here are all these young kids in Guam. Nowhere to go, nowhere to get there. And so we needed to get that thing back up and running. So we worked at that. We got them to help us paint it. We painted the chapel. It was a wonderful time. It was a special time because they were from Barksdale. And there was a reason that was special to me, because I brought another story with me to Guam. About 5 days before I left, my husband gets a phone call from a guy named Jake Fisher, who resided in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is where Barksdale Air Force Base is. Okay? My husband and he knew each other. Jake was an old guy by then and died a little later, but they knew each other as hospital chaplains. Well, they were talking, and James told him, I was getting ready to go to Guam. And Jake told James, he said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? He said, when I was a young naval chaplain, and what's the first rank in a Navy officer?
Oh, God, I don't know.
Whatever a naval officer is, he was the youngest ranking that you could be. And his first assignment was in Guam. And he told James this story. He said, my wife and I, he was in the Navy, and of course there's a naval base there as well. He said, we had our first son there. And he said, it was Jake the second, or Jake Jr. And Jake lived 6 days. This was during the Korean War. So this was way back in the 50s. Kids, shouldn't say it that way. babies, infants now would likely live. There would be medicine interventions, neonatal things to help support children. But you imagine the number of losses of young infants or neonatal losses in two gigantic bases of young married people. Lots of infant loss. And he said, we have tried so hard. We tried so hard to get back. That in all of those years, it would have been 50 years by then, we could never get back to Guam and visit his grave. He said, our children have never seen his grave. His brothers and sisters never saw his grave. And he said, I wonder if she might try to find his grave. All he had to do was say that. I was determined I was going to find that boy's grave. And he says, I believe it's down near the naval base, near a tree. That didn't help me much. But I decided one day my chaplain assistant and I took the day off. And it was going to be a true excursion. We were going to find that boy's grave. And so we drive down to the naval base, go to the chaplain's office there and say, where would there be a cemetery here? And it pointed down there and there's a beautiful tree and yes, that's it. I was so excited. We got it. We tore that place apart. Tree or no tree, there was no grave for that boy. And I was so disappointed. And all of the Barksdale kids there, airmen, knew we were out on this adventure, so they were behind it too. And so the chaplain and I are just driving the truck around. The wing chaplain loaned us, it was such a big deal, he loaned us his truck, to go for it. Then we go to another location, and we just look and look and look and look and look. Nothing. And finally, we are coming back home, and there was a big, I guess it was a VA cemetery. We stopped in and looked a while, and finally somebody was in the office. And they explained to us that the Navy, it used to be a naval cemetery there, but it was given over to the VA. He said, now there's a section here for infants. It was huge, big old section over here. And it was hot. Gentlemen, I'm sorry. It was hot in Guam. And I was menopausal. I told you I was old. And man, talk about sweating. I was sweaty, and we're out there, but I was going to find that boy's grave. And I was about to give up. I was tired, it was hot. And finally, row after row after row. I don't know if I cried or laughed or danced or what, I can't remember. But I found it. My chaplain assistant, I found that grave. And I took pictures and sent them, and I called my husband in the middle of the night here, and I said, I found it. It was 3 o'clock in the morning here. And so I sent all of that to him, and he sent them to Jake. And Jake got to see his boy's spot with his name, and his children, for the first time, got to see their brother. And I asked them what happens, and they said, does anybody ever visit here? Because they could not come back as a family. And they said, every Memorial Day, we place a flower on every grave in the cemetery. So, gosh, that is so important for our psyche and for mamas and daddies. Anyway, so to tell Jake that, who could not go to Guam, which I get, was a psychological and spiritual act of hope. And so, Jake never forgot it, and that's become, and let me tell you how I knew I was going to tell you this story. My phone rang this week, And it was my chaplain assistant from Puerto Rico 2 days ago. About 10 years ago, I spoke with him one time, but no reason to have spoken then. Since then, I was thinking about him that morning because I was thinking about him. He phoned me from Fort Worth, Texas. He didn't even know that was my phone number. I said, this is a miracle. And I don't say that much. I felt like it was Holy Spirit going, tell this story. And I told him I was going to do it. And he goes, I can't believe you're going to do that. I have written that story in Spanish. And many, many, many people have read it. And he said, I'll send it to you in English. And he did. So, you know, Barksdale comes to Guam. What's amazing about that story is that it took that time and place again for his past to be combined with his hope. For old Jake down in Shreveport to have that story reconciled in himself, and for his children to know their story and to know their big brother's name for the first time back in the 50s. And all of the Barksdale crew helped make that happen and celebrated with that. Now, does that story change the world? Did it change Jake's world? You better believe it did. Did it change my world? You better believe it did. Did it shake Sergeant Maldonado, who this was in 2007, remembering 30-something years ago. Yeah. And I think it changed all of those kids. I asked them to go see Jake when they got back to Barksdale. I don't know if they did. It's kind of the same thing. I don't know if they did. But I invited them to know him, a military chaplain. That's the story. Any thoughts? Do you like Jake? I do too. I like baby Jake too. I don't know what he'd be like. I love those kids from Barksdale that just painted away. Most of them would never come to chapel, but they came and painted it. Yeah. Then they painted the Airman Center. Yeah. Because they want to do something that matters. You know, not flying a B-52 every day. I feel as old as a B-52.
I love the people who put the flowers on the tombstones.
Love the people who put the flowers on Jake Fisher II's grave every Memorial Day. Yeah. Any thoughts, questions, and then I'll hush up from there.
We need those stories because we're human, it touches us. And I think it gives us encouragement. And the will to keep on in ministry, whatever that is, wherever we are. But we need to hear those stories. It's about people.
We do.
Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah. We need to tell those stories and our stories.
Yeah.
I only have about 3 or 4 I tell over time because the rest of it was important. But those are the big ones that shape something in me. That shape my hope, that shape my sense of calling and affirm my sense of calling. Any last thing?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for all you've done. It's very inspiring.
Oh,
I admire you for that. But I have a question.
Yes.
Because we're in such a diverse culture and everything, I've always just assumed every chaplain was of Christian faith.
Nope.
Not anymore. or
Oh, no,
not ever.
never have been. Well, maybe in the Revolutionary War, but no. I mean, have you ever heard of 4 Chaplains Sunday? Go to the Pentagon. There's big, beautiful stained glass. The Dorchester, forgot, went down in the war, and there were 4 chaplains on that who sacrificed their life gave up their life raft to help other people, a rabbi, a Catholic priest, and 2 Protestant chaplains all died. It's called Four Chaplains Sunday. Look it up, Google it, and just see about them. And there's a wonderful books about their stories, each one of them and their journey. Now there are chaplains of many faith traditions. All of the major world religions. There are Buddhist chaplains, there are Muslim chaplains, rabbis, and there are about 1 million different Protestant sorts, and Roman Catholics, Greek Orthodox, and Orthodox chaplains, and those are the big ones that are there and doing a wonderful job. It's a very diverse body, and a lot of Latter-day Saints chaplains, and the president of my chaplain class. And the beauty of that diversity is the power that those stories get to be held by the God story. However people name that, people are going to hold that. So that's a good question. Yeah.
You know, I've not been in your world, but whether those chaplains, whatever faith they have, or denomination we might call it, that didn't matter then. That doesn't matter. That they are talking about love and about Creator, and that we care for you. So that transcends all that. But maybe we need to learn from that in our society. That transcends everything.
This young man didn't say, I want a Southern Baptist chaplain that's a male, because they would have had their feelings hurt. You know, because I was the one on call. They were going to get me, you know. And so it's a powerful thing if we'll trust the love of God, and if I don't have to be in charge of everything that means. Because I love to think I know what's always true. Well, I don't. I know that God is with us. God is incarnate, came through, in my tradition, my understanding, through Jesus. And that is powerful skin to put on. It remains with us and heals us.
I'm glad you came tonight. Thank you.
Thank you,
It's an honor.
If Stuart wasn't here.
Keep looking at his little freckles sometimes.
He loves the unison.
I'm so honored to be here. Let me bless you. May the strength of Christ uplift you. The comfort of the Holy Spirit surround you. And the grace and mercy of our God give you hope and give you courage this day and every single day as we tell our stories. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.